Portugal, where I've had the pleasure to be for a couple of days now for the Global Exploration Summit with explorers from all over the world, and to be meeting women in science and technology, and discussing with you what has changed for women, and what has changed because of women, because I think that's really a key part of it, is that and you'll see it's going to be a current recurring theme in the few slides I'd like to share with you, which is that I think we not only have an opportunity, but truly an obligation to help ensure that more women get to participate in science and technology. I will now try to share my screen with you. So let's see how that process goes. And hopefully this will work. So it looks like we have this working. I'm going to start off with this slide, which shows my daughter on the right, Kinga, who just turned 9 years old. And next to her, you see the Apollo astronauts. And so we'll start off on space. So Julia mentioned I have a special connection with space. I've done a lot of work in the sector. I was one of the earliest investor in commercial space, a big advocate also of democratizing access to space and leveraging the commercial sector to help with national security in the US and more broadly. And 2 years ago, roughly, my daughter, who attended this presentation by the Apollo astronaut, had a chance to ask them a question, and she wanted to ask her own question. And what she asked them is, why are there no girls on stage? And Rusty Spiker, one of the Apollo astronauts, gave the answer. And his answer was, we were not as smart then as we are now. And so that's how things started. And now I want to show you how things are going in space. And this slide is sort of, to me, shows a hopeful vision of where we are in the future. And I'll try and go to other sector than space after that to sort of expand the picture. But what you're seeing there is two women, obviously, but these two women are going to be the oldest and the youngest American to go to space. So imagine the idea that both the youngest and the oldest American astronaut are both going to be women. On the left is Wally Funk. She was denied a place on the Mercury 13 space program in the 60s because of her gender. And on the right is Haley Arsenault, who is a childhood cancer survivor who at age 10 was a patient at St. Jude Hospital. And she had a dream of going to space, never thought, that dream would become a reality for her. But thanks to St. Jude Hospital, she recovered and she decided to dedicate her life to go back to St. Jude as a physician assistant to help other kids who had been in that same situation she had been in herself. And recently she got a phone call, and that phone call was a question, what would you think about realizing that childhood dream? How about going to space? And she couldn't believe it. And it was an invitation to join the Inspiration 4 mission that will leave in September to orbit aboard a SpaceX rocket. And she's a part of that team. And so here you go, the youngest and the oldest American astronaut in space, two women. And to stay on that theme, I here had the pleasure recently to be with Haley Arsenault that you just saw, and with two other women. There is sort of a commonality of a theme there. We're all women of space, women in space. Now I'm the odd duck. I'm the one on this picture who's not going to space. Anushi Ansari that you see in the middle is actually the first commercial astronaut who went to space. She's in Portugal right now. She actually spoke yesterday at the Global Exploration Summit, and you know, she is someone who did a lot to open commercial space as well, and she financed something that was called the Ansari XPRIZE, that basically was the beginning of the commercial space industry. It led to the vehicle that Virgin Galactic has now developed that will take Richard Branson and other astronauts to space, and has been in tests up to now. And what's interesting, though, to reflect on is that it's taken 15 years, 2006 to 2021, so we can finally talk about a second commercial astronaut female flyer. And those two women are going to go together, and it's Dr. Sian Proctor and Hallie Arsenault. So Hallie, the youngest American in space, and Sian has an amazing personal story as well. She is a pilot, but she's first and foremost an artist who loves science and communicates about science and space through her paintings, her drawing, her poetry. And she was part of the 2009 astronaut selection process, during which she competed against over 3,500 participants. She was chosen as one of the 47 finalists. But during the final round, she was not one of the 9 astronaut candidates selected for the 2009 NASA astronaut group. And that was crushing to her. And I know we have a lot of young women students in science and technology on this Zoom, and it happens to all of us. Like we get there's this thing, we've been working really hard like Sian had, and you'll see, and you just have to stick with it. You know, Sian had this love for space, she stuck with it. She didn't think she would have that chance one day, but she got the same call that Hallie got, you know, how about being a member of this Inspiration 4 mission? And what's interesting about that is both Hallie and Sian, so commercial space is opening, but commercial space is still, it doesn't mean space is democratized yet. We still have a lot of work to do. The cost is still really high. And so their flight is being financed. And there are something like 7 commercial astronauts that have been to space yet. We probably will be over 10 very soon. And most of them are still men. And, you know, Anousheh talked beautifully yesterday about, you know, the limitation we sometimes put on ourselves as women. And it's one thing to sort of find this strength within us to believe we can do it because we can. But there still are institutional barriers of all kinds. And in that case, I think, you know, the wealth gap is what I would sort of point to. Women, you know, are doing amazing things, but they haven't built the same wealth than more men have that allows them to fulfill that dream that is still a very expensive dream. Now, the hope is that over time, obviously, that cost decreases, it becomes more democratized, and women need to claim their place at the table. But astronaut and women in space is not just about being an astronaut, right? Women in space is also the women that are building the industry. Yesterday at Galex, I had the great pleasure to be on stage with Anousheh, but also Dr. Nina Lenza, who is a planetary scientist who had recently her second instrument flown on Mars. Elizabeth Turtle, who is doing some work on the moon of Saturn, also was with us, although she joined us remotely. And all these women are doing amazing work. Dr. Nina Lenza shared with us that until recently, her entire chem engineering ops team was made of women. So an all women's team. I think that recently changed, but what a picture of where things are now. So I like the contrast between the Apollo astronaut photo and that photo, you know, how it started and where we are. Now, if we expand beyond space, you know, I think it's tough not to celebrate women like Catalin Carrico this year. This year's Rosanne Steele Award, which is a prize for distinguished work in basic medical research, was awarded to her and her colleague Drew Weissman for the pioneering work they did on messenger RNA behind the COVID-19 vaccines. And what a personal story she also has. An immigrant scientist who came from Hungary. And I would encourage all of you to look up, you know, her personal story. It's a woman who's worked her entire life humbly on her research, and all those decades of work are now culminating in those vaccines that are saving the world. And I just think that's beautiful. And oftentimes we women sort of take the long path, right? Those planetary scientists, Dr. Nina Lanza, Dr. Elizabeth Turtle, some of the work they're doing on those planetary mission and moon missions, you know, will bring back their results in the mid 2030s, right? And we're in 2021, but it's that work, that patience, that long-term view, and just really important work for humanity. Other women I wanted to spotlight because I really think we need to celebrate how women are making the future happen and advancing science and technology is Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuelle Charpentier. They're pioneers of CRISPR gene editing, won the Chemistry Nobel Prize. And what I think is beautiful about this picture, you know, is that it's a transatlantic cooperation. You know, it's a U.S. and a French scientist, and this is what we all need to work towards. It's by putting our capabilities together, doing research together, you know, developing commercial deployment opportunities together that will get stronger. Yeah, what a photo. I just think we need to celebrate them. Now I've highlighted quite a few scientists, and I know we also have entrepreneurs in science and technology on the Zoom, or aspiring entrepreneurs as well. And we had this year in the US, a really great story was Whitney Wolfe Herd. She's 31. She really broke glass ceilings as a CEO and as a mom, as the youngest self-made female billionaire. And you see her here holding her baby, ringing the bell on the NASDAQ when her company became publicly traded. And what's really nice also about the story of what she built, and for those not familiar with Bumble, it's actually an online dating app. So maybe the younger women on the Zoom will, you know, have experience with that or similar app. For the older one like me, who've been married over 10 years, I just celebrated my 10-year anniversary. You know, it's not really, we're not as familiar, but it wasn't designed as a rebranding of the other online dating platform that existed. She had started her career at Tinder, but instead she built it with an authentic understanding of the challenging dynamics for women of online dating. And what Bumble does is that it requires female users to make the first move. So it puts control in the women's hand, and it reframed in that way the conversation. It created an experience that for women is, you know, something that caters a lot more to what's comfortable for them. And so I thought that it was nice that her success came from also really paying attention to what women wanted. And now I'm going to move on. I think it's the first male photographer I'm showing on my slides. I serve on the board of XPRIZE. It's an organization that's dear to my heart. We are putting together global competition to encourage everyone who works in science and technology, but also students, to get involved and solve the greatest challenge of humanity. And recently we put out a call for everyone who wants to participate in what is the largest incentive prize in history. It's $100 million gigaton scale carbon removal prize. The idea behind this prize is that we really need, if we want to get the ball rolling to save the climate crisis and our planet, to really start pulling carbon dioxide directly from the atmosphere or ocean, sequester it durably and sustainably. And so far there wasn't enough incentives for the global community to focus on that. And so very generously, the Musk Foundation put up $100 million so we could launch this prize. And I'm putting this slide up as calling women in science and tech, because we want, a lot of women participants. So whether it's all women team, mixed team involving lots of women, we'd love to see a very high female participation. And we have a student track, which I wanted to highlight, especially because the first student award will actually be awarded, I believe it's in October or November, so very soon, which means, if you're a student and interested, you need to go and register now, and maybe we can send afterwards, or I can, the website is xprize.org/carbon removal. And if you have any question, you can also send an email to carbonremoval@xprize.org. But it's really, I would encourage everyone to participate. It's an ideas competition for the students. So if you're already, a practitioner, an established company, that the requirements are higher, but for the student, it's an idea competition, which means you don't need to necessarily be in session and have access to a lab where you want to build technology and put it in the field. That would require much more time. It's just about you writing, how you think we solve this issue. And I love idea competition myself, because this is how I started 25 years ago. So I was born in France, and when I was 17, there was a competition organized called the GII Junior Summit, and they wanted young people from all over the world to start having conversation about the governance of the internet and the future of the internet. And I was selected to go to Japan and spend time with other students from around the world, for us young people to share with ministers from around the globe and sort of leaders at the time on the internet and emerging technologies, what we thought the future should be made of. And you see on this slide, Nicolas Negroponte, who was the director of the Media Lab at the conference. That's where I met him. He became later on my sponsor when I became an American citizen. And I just think those ideas competition are ways to open up our minds. I've made, friends for life there that I cherish having to this day. And more importantly, it really gave me that sort of agency and sense that, we all had a voice and a role to play to help advance humanity and make the future happen. And it stayed with me all through those years. And in some way, it's what gave me the confidence, to take steps to try and do my part at my level, as I progress in my career. So I went to Harvard Business School in the US. That's how I arrived in the US, actually. And there I had the chance to work with an all-female team on a technology company that became the first technology company to allow women to freeze their eggs so that they could have babies later in life or after a cancer treatment, which oftentimes, sadly, as we know, otherwise will risk the woman losing her fertility. I had the chance to serve as a co-founder and the president CEO of Escape Dynamics, a company that developed beamed energy propulsion technology for space launch. And beamed energy has all kinds of other fascinating application beyond space launch, but that was also a fascinating R&D effort to be involved with. It was commercially backed R&D effort. We didn't go to the stage of deploying the technology since, I mean, things are going pretty well with chemical rockets. Even if they're limited, we'll give them the run they have. And I'm the founder CEO, as Joya was mentioning, of Global Space Venture, where I get to support entrepreneurs building the future with emerging technologies, from AI to biotech to space, which is a joy every day. I also serve on the board of XPRIZE and the NATO Unmanned Maritime System Innovation Advisory Board, where we're developing a vision for a digital ocean. And another board I serve on that has to do with science and technology, which is very dear to my heart, is the board of the National Museum of Mathematics, because I think, bringing in girls and kids in general, exciting them about math and STEM early on is critical. And a lot of our work recently has been also on focusing that we're making math accessible to all, because it's really important that the programs we offer really truly cater to the diversity of the audiences and all the kids that we can reach, and so that they have a chance. Everybody has a chance to get involved with STEM. And with that, I wanted to share a sort of empowering message of hope on how we all have this responsibility to make the future happen. So again, it's not just an opportunity in my mind, it's an obligation. And I wanted to share with you that recently I was on a call with 2 Nobel Prizes and the Dalai Lama, and one of the Nobel Prize asked, and it was a Nobel Peace Prize, asked, how should we go about, really sharing the leadership burden or responsibility with men if they're not giving it. I liked the Dalai Lama's answer. He just said, you women, all of you, take responsibility in the world to bring more compassion on and peace. And the underlying message there was, don't wait to be asked. Don't ask permission. I mean, work within the system, work collaboratively, find ways to get involved. There are always ways. It might not be exactly what you were thinking about, but you have a role to play and you need to take that responsibility. And so I just want to leave us with that idea. And what am I? Yeah, and so now I think we can move to Q&A. I think I went one slide too far. I'm not sure how. I should probably take that off, but yes, we're back here to Q&A, right?
Yes.
Okay. So.
Laetitia, thank you so much for that stimulating discussion. That was super interesting, and we appreciate your insights. I want to encourage anybody who's watching to please write your questions into the chat. We already have a couple of questions for you. And so the first one is, so when it comes to the incredibly fast changing technologies in which you've spent a lifetime investing, I know that our audience would be really eager to know what kinds of things you find right now more promising, and also what kind of keeps you up at night. What worries you? And in other words, I'm sure that there are some technologies that you see as auspicious for mankind and others that concern you with respect to their destructive capacity or their potential for misuse. And we would surely be interested in your perspective as to what you see as a way to enable the advances to take place in a constructive and non-damaging way.
Yes, sure. So I think there are lots of really interesting arenas. So satellite constellations to start, in terms of communication, like Starlink that SpaceX is building. I think, I'm very excited by that because that's really deploying and allowing access, connectivity for basically the great many and everyone. And I think that's sort of the premise that 25 years ago, our dream as youngsters was, everyone should have access. And we're finally getting there. So that's one thing I'm very excited about. To stay on the space topic for a bit, I think everything around space situational awareness is another area that's really exciting to me, and will grow in importance just because of the increased number of assets that we have around the planet. So space situational awareness is really becoming important. I think, the future is female, but the future is also AI. So AI, artificial intelligence, is really where I think a lot of our future is going. So any of you who is in the AI space, I think this is really going to be so important in so many ways. Just recently, General John Allen, who is one of the people I look up to, as a mentor, he's the president of the Brookings Institution, wrote a book on called Future War. European defense is the general theme, and he highlights the importance of AI and of all of us to try and be on the same page as to the important role AI will need to play in that future of national security, on which we need to be aligned, because you can't decide overnight. It's too late once you realize you needed it, right? It takes years together. I think drones is another area that's fascinating, and I got a chance today at the Instituto Técnico of Lisboa. I'm being helped here to get the name right, to see some wonderful technology being developed. Quantum computing is obviously the next frontier, and who gets here first will be important. I'm very fascinated by the work we're doing on the digital ocean, building a theater advanced ocean management platform vision, and how this will pull together all kinds of technologies. Now, what worries me, which was your other questions to Joya, I guess I'll summarize my biggest long-term worry to one question, which is, if we create general AI that's effectively sentient, how could it possibly care about humanity? Now, at the same time, I'm not one of those people who will say that means we need to stop development of AI, because if we allow adversaries with lower ethical standards with regards to privacy rights or even the value of a human life to lead the way in this area, it's a real risk. So we cannot constrain the development of AI. We have, to think about the hard question. If Russia and China do not ban AI, for example, from any of their systems, but we do, where does that get us? And we need to imagine the types of situations we might be faced with, and that needs to guide what we decide to do. We need to be careful to not say, oh no, we can't do this, or that's, other worries I have, I'll try to turn them into opportunities to be, to try and think proactively and in a positive way about the future, as you said, is I really hope that we'll find ways to really collaborate well amongst techno democracies and democracies in general around the world, and countries that share liberal values. We have to collaborate on tech protection. Tech protection regimes are only as strong as their weakest link. We have to collaborate on cybersecurity, on supporting a tech order that is consistent with the liberal values we share. And I think we also need to collaborate on aggregating our innovation capabilities. The digital ocean vision that the NATO Innovation Advisory Board I serve on is developing is an example of that. And I think there's a real opportunity there for more transatlantic cooperation, broader cooperation amongst techno-democracies beyond the transatlantic era. But most of all, we have to act fast because this is really happening now. And then finally, I would say that I think it matters to also ensure, as you know, women in science and technology, we're tackling the important problems. We were talking about taking the long view. Sometimes, you know, we've seen in the US because of Wall Street and venture capital and the way sort of the economy works and returns work, it's, you know, a lot of people go and work on the next app, the next thing that can be monetized quickly and have an IPO or get vote, you know, by a SPAC within 18 months. And sometimes this is solving actual real important issues, but sometimes it's not. And so making sure that we find and set up the right incentives like we're doing with XPRIZE for things like carbon removal, for example, where we really need to help sort of incent that ecosystem to work together is also something that I think is important and a real opportunity.
Thank you, Laetitia. We have some good questions. I'm going to ask one from Maria Rosa, who wants to know that in addition to role modeling, which other initiatives would you propose to attract more women to the field of science? She says that in Europe, the percent of women selecting scientific careers is not increasing. It's either staying stable or going down. And do you know what the situation is in the US? And what would you propose as an idea, if you have any, for bringing more women into scientific training?
Yeah, so I think it's important to role model. So the representation angle is definitely important. I think it starts early. So the issue I think we're facing is there is sort of a gap. So once we've lost the women, you won't attract the women at the PhD level if they've not done sort of the courses right before PhD, right? You can't suddenly say, I want lots of women in that PhD program. So you kind of have to think earlier and see where is the drop off. So that drop off is going to be really different everywhere. In the US, we're seeing that, you know, starting 8 years old, girls start dropping a little bit in math, right? There's a first drop off there, but what are the key points at which they drop off? And depending what they are in the discipline, the specific discipline you're looking at, try and create those pathways by creating programs. So at the Museum of Math, we have programs for girls, you know, a little older than 8, actually, it's more like teens, but it's a way to pull them back in, right? So we have those reading groups where they get to sit down with women mathematicians and discuss like exciting books that may be a book, you know, by Hannah Fry, who is a British mathematician who is like fascinating and talks about AI and the math of AI. And so it's a way to sort of pull them back in a way that will be appealing to them. So I think thinking about content that could attract women. I think in general, if you're a woman and you're in that field, you know, not just role modeling, but ensuring you're also a sponsor, you're requesting, you're pushing for more women to be in, right? So if you join a board and the representation of women is low, ensuring, you know, you maybe instead of joining the strategic committee or the finance committee, join the nominating committee and say, hey, we need more women, and I'm going to make it my personal mission. But if you're an undergrad somewhere and, you know, you're on a team and you're the only woman and there are 4 guys, you know, saying, hey, we need to add a woman to the team, right? So I think it's a lot of small steps we all need to take. There is no one big solution fits all. I mean, we wish it was something we had like a lot of models we could easily scale, right? But if it was the case, it would already have happened. And so I think the work is on all of us to sort of make it happen as we see the opportunities arise in our daily environments. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for that thoughtful answer. Actually, it leads very naturally into the next question that comes from Ines. She thanks you for your inspirational talk, and she was glad to hear of the value you place on math for young girls. She agrees that this is a bottleneck, and she wants to, she has a question about discussing gender balance at an institutional level. She says that some men tend to bring the argument of merit as opposed to just promoting gender balance and diversity. And how would you tackle, or what do you think about this discussion?
And so Inesh, so when you mention men bring the argument of marriage, and I don't know if Inesh is able, if we are able to unmute her, but I want to make sure I understand your question. Are you saying that they're meant
merit? The question is that they bring up the issue of merit.
Merit. Oh, so women are not as deserving would be their, well, I mean, right?
I think it might be, well, if Ines can be unmuted, Victor, that would be great.
Yes, I am unmuted now. Thank you. Thank you, Laetitia, first of all. So my point is somehow, and that is the pressure of society, and it's a good thing that you have to consider gender and issues regarding gender. And some people, well, mostly men, of course, tend to say, well, we have to promote merit. That is the most important thing. And of course, they don't care about gender balance or any other kind of social balance, I would say, putting merit up front. But I think that, well, the point here is that when we want to promote gender balance and diversity, of course, we are not getting merit out of the discussion, but it's more the idea that we have to, there are some things that if you do not promote, they will not happen naturally. So what you were saying about promoting the role models and attracting young girls, that is important. But yes, if you want to turn things around, you can say, well, we are, that is not fair. You can have that kind of argument, well, for gender or any other thing. And then that means that society will stay as it is, even if it's unfair. That's the point.
Yeah, so I think for this one, so I think merit is always a great criteria for selection. And I refuse the argument that for each man who merits, there is not a woman who would. There is always a woman who is just as good as the man. If whoever is saying otherwise is not searching enough or is not recognizing what is right in front of them. And so I think we need to do a better job to basically, when they say it's merit, it's say, okay, let's sit down, let's compare. And I will show you candidates that are women and have just as many qualifications and deserves just as much. I mean, it's like statistic. There's always a way to present things that they will sway things to, oh, this person is more deserving. But no, we need to also, so I think that's where nomination committee or women helping each other is critical, right? And where the other thing is, I really don't believe there's a situation where we won't find a woman that just merits as much as the guy. But if it were the case in some obscure kind of area, the one thing we can do is still to say, okay, well, this person, okay, he happens to be a male and he has great qualification. And we don't have yet enough women with that type of qualification. What program are we setting up to ensure we will? That next time when that role will turn around in 2 years, there will be at least 2-3 women that are ready to take on. Let's create that program, right? So it's sort of working backwards and making sure that if you're not picking a woman for that role and there has never been a woman in the past in that role, that's not normal. Let's make sure we're setting up a program that means that next time you'll have at least 2 or 3 women that you have in the final selection committee, in the final slate, and that you'll be able to pick one, thinking she's deserving, right? That's a great question, Ines, and really, I mean, yeah, it's rarely merit when people don't get something. It's oftentimes other things, but I think it's important to make the case.
Thanks, Laetitia, for the observation. Actually, Maria Cabral wants everyone to know that the country that has the most women in science is Portugal, according to the OCDE. I actually wanted to narrow the subject to women, not just in technology, but in all fields. Women have demanded a couple of changes, literally for half a century, right? We've been demanding equal pay and benefits as men in the same jobs, and clear and merit-based progression standards and opportunities. And it's been 50 years since, you know, women's lib, all of this crazy things that happened back then, and it feels like they're forgotten. And what are your impressions or observations as to why these two very basic elements, especially equal pay for the same work, haven't changed very much, especially in the world of technology, where it persists, the problem persists, the pay gap persists?
Yes, so I think there are a number of things that need to change over time. Like I think more equality and participation in parenting. And I say equality, I mean every couple, everyone who has a chance to be in a couple, because there are also a lot of single parents that have to find the right balance. But I think it's an important prerequisite for workforce participation equity in some way. And that won't be mandated because it's something that no one sees, right? It's your own private life. But it's important because, you know, the more you go up in level of seniority, the more you need to be able to go for 4 days somewhere, you know, on a business trip. And that becomes more important, right? But what if you're considered the main parent who needs to be at home with a kid, right? So having a partner that understands that one or the other needs to have this freedom and needs to be able to feel free to take this freedom, because that will impact the kind of mission you take on, right? And that could impact the way you're viewed as far as the pay you deserve, based on not merit here, but sort of how fully sort of committed to the mission are you? Is it truly your priority? Is it but I think there are unconscious bias from you know the system, if you will, the people that need to be convinced that you're worthy of a raise or equal pay or a promotion. And it's a little harder to deal with unconscious bias because you don't really know it's there. Oftentimes also there's a lack of transparency. I think there is nothing better than getting to know the people who are making those decisions, so they really know you. They understand your circumstances, how different it might be from their own, right? If the person who decides your pay is 15 years older than you are, they've grown up in a different mindset where the role of women was different, and they might view things differently. And so spending the time to sort of outline that and having a friendly relationship with that person so they understand how things are different. But in the absence of rule and mandate, because not everything will be solved by mandate and rules, what you can do pragmatically, and the advice I generally give it's generally younger women who find themselves in this situation because they haven't been through it once, so they don't know to do it. You know, the older one still get into that situation, but they know what to do. But you know, the call I've gotten a few times is someone who calls me and has seen, you know, a printout they shouldn't have seen on a printer showing the pay of their male colleague, and it happens to be 20-30% higher than theirs. What do I do? I feel horrible. And I've told them, well, you know, my advice, just go sit with your direct boss and tell him or her that you saw this and you'd like to know what the reason is for the difference in pay. And if it's not justified, if your pay can be matched to your colleague's pay. And oftentimes you'll see that you'll have a great discussion out of that, and it will lead to the pay being matched. And it's, you know, about not taking it personally. People will have those unconscious bias. There will be all kinds of reason, and they might try to justify why there's a difference. And then it's your job to try and say, but it's different, right? They might say, well, this person did this university, you did this program, and this person has X years experience, you have that many. And then you'll turn to them and say, is what matters the number of years of past experience, or is what matters the value we're providing to the company now and will in the coming years? And so hopefully they'll say, well, no, the value, what matters is what you're providing now. So is my work right now on all the projects I've done this year, as you know, have they brought as much to the company as my colleague? It is my impression, do you agree with that assessment? And having that honest, candid conversation is helpful. You might learn a lot about how your boss perceives you, where they think you might have not done as well as you think you've done. And that's incredibly useful feedback, because you'll do better next year, and then you will get this increase in pay next year. So yeah.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that raising the issue and not perceiving it as a complaint is really it's the only logical approach, right? When it happens on a personal level. For our tech savvy folks, would you share with us a little bit more about your experience on unmanned systems and the potential of unmanned systems, especially maritime ones, and what might be the most interesting technology that you might have seen is recently or currently being developed?
Yes, sure. So the work we're focusing on the Maritime Unmanned System Innovation Advisory Board of NATO is really to build a vision for a digital ocean. And the vision is to bring together a vast theater network of sensors stretching from seafloor to the ocean surface to space, and including unmanned surface vehicles, subsea sensors, satellites, ships, buoys, drones, and ultimately the vision is to bring together and create a theater advanced ocean management platform. So it's really the idea of, bringing in all those technologies together in a cohesive way where we can all benefit from existing assets, existing technology being developed oftentimes for a single use application, but that can be used for multi-purpose or shared. And the intent is to fuse the data and exploit with machine learning and artificial intelligence, and overall enhance maritime domain awareness, but also conduct and advance climate research, which obviously is a big area for all of us to cooperate on in the years to come.
Oh, thank you. Interesting. We have a question on what your opinion is on invasive technologies, and whether there should be more influence by women on them. Does invasive technology mean anything to you?
So it's interesting. The person who sent this question says, by invasive technology, they mean companies having access to our equipment to use it for multi-purpose, namely advertising. So I think that person is raising maybe the issue of some technology companies having access to our data and leveraging this data to create advertising cash flow streams for themselves. And so, I think that while Europe has done quite an amazing job, I think, in terms of, GDPR and forcing companies to sort of renew the authorization from the users in terms of what type of data they want to share or not. In fact, since I arrived in Europe, I keep getting those messages about, am I okay with this? Do I want to change the parameters of what I'm sharing? Things that in the US, no one's asking me. And so I think, it's great to see that Europe is tackling that straight on. I think there needs to be disclosure, and there needs to be agency for users to decide what they do. It's not quite the example of, watching movies and being thrown advertising in the middle of it, and your decision whether you want the paying program where there is no advertisement or the it's not quite that. It's much broader than this issue we already faced, a while back. Because now data is leveraged in so many ways. At the same time, some people find value in it, and enjoy being served the ad that will actually be within their search parameters and things they have recently searched. So I think all of us have very different sort of personal comfort with how much we feel fine to be tracked online or served ads, and people have to be given the option to sort of choose. Where it gets a little tricky is when it comes to information and sort of the way that a lot of organization will end up using that data you're talking about to serve truth or information as truth to users who don't know otherwise and are being convinced of that an information is true when it's not. And that obviously has disastrous consequences when it comes to election that can be completely rigged because of disinformation. And so I think, there's a lot more we can do on disinformation, misinformation, and we really have to work hard on this and find better ways to solve that.
We have one last little question from, I just lost it, from Babita. She thanks you very much for your wonderful talk. And she says that we're talking about women from all around the world, but why are we focused on American and European? And what about Asian women? I know that you've worked a lot with Asian women, and so and being one of origin myself, I'm surely interested in what you have to say about your experience with that.
And I read, I now have access to some of the questions. I'm looking also, and I see that Michelle is mentioning, and sorry if I mispronounce her name, Michelle, but Mamta Nagaraja, who had a great success at NASA. So I'm not familiar with the work of Mamta. I will look it up certainly after this call. But
she spoke here on behalf of the embassy as well recently. She's
that's wonderful to hear. So I mean, definitely diversity. I had a slide on diversity, so I should have kept it in. It's definitely a huge focus. It is, we need more minorities involved, all kinds of minorities. It's not just racial diversity, gender diversity. I mean, all kinds of diversity. I think when you fight for diversity in one place, you fight for diversity everywhere, and it benefits everybody. And the sort of Asian one highlights also another interesting area, which is you might have followed many years ago. There was an issue of someone who had been suspected of potentially spying for the Chinese, and someone who had to go through really rough sort of searching and it had been unjustified. And I think it's really important to not presume that because someone is originally from Asia, that that means they're spying for China, or and so I think it's there are real discussions to be had, and making sure that people don't fall prey to sort of suspicion when there is no reason to be, right? There are bad people everywhere. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with racial sort of ethnicity, and so I think it's just very encouraging to see so many Black women, so many Asian women working on great programs at NASA and throughout the US government. And I think you've seen with the appointments President Biden has made so far that the focus on both gender and racial diversity has been very, very strong. And it's definitely something that's core and important to us. And I know is important to Portugal as well. Yeah, it's great to see.
Thank you, Laetitia. We've come to the end of our time, and everybody I know is super grateful for your insights and your smarts, and you are also proof that there are good people everywhere. So we look forward to seeing you thrive. We're really appreciative of your time today and of the benefits you're bringing to the world. Not just professionally, but also personally. So thank you. And with that, I'm going to close our program.
Thank you, everyone. Great to be with you all.